Chapter 119, Bargains, Antony's POV. Antony signed furiously, glowering as his bruised and swollen knuckles fumbled simple words. "No blood. I want to go home." Julia crossed her arms and answered verbally. "No, you're staying here until you're stable." "I can't die," Antony signed. "This is pointless." "It's not about whether you'll die. It's about preventing you from doing something that will delay your recovery or cause you unnecessary pain." He exaggerated his gesture at her for emphasis. "Your unnecessary pain." Julia spoke before he could finish signing. "Yes, all right. You've made your feelings clear." This argument was made even more annoying by the fact that Antony knew she was right. He was being absurd. His body was shattered, broken in a dozen places, and he couldn't even turn his head or make tiny hand signs without blinding pain. Anyone could see he ought to be in the infirmary. But there were so many people here, and he couldn't think. Esau was there, beaten and mutilated by Marcus. Julia was there, horrified witness to Titus's atrocities. How was Antony supposed to cry for his brother and his ex-lover while they watched? How could he start working out the painful puzzle of his love for these two men while Esau and Julia were there to remind him that if he had any moral fiber, he would be able to discard brother and partner both without a second thought? And discard myself along with them. Yes, his needs were shameful. Yes, he didn't deserve to have needs after all he'd done and all he'd allowed, but those needs still clawed at him, and he was too weak to wrestle them down. "Please," he signed, "because why should a monster be too proud to beg? I need to be alone. I can't process everything that's happened with so many people around. Please." She hesitated, looking uncertain. That was a rare enough expression on her face that Antony realized he had to pounce immediately. "It's making Esau nervous to have me here," he signed. Her lips turned down, and Antony knew he'd won. It was even true. Antony and Esau had spent the last several hours in a holding pattern, each pretending to sleep while the other was awake, so as to postpone their next conversation as long as possible. Even now, Antony could hear his offering shallow, hunted breaths and sense the terrified speed of his heart. That was its own problem. His senses were sharpened to a razor's edge, his cursed body urging him to bite and tear and gorge himself on the rich red flow that would help him heal. If he hadn't been so battered, it would have been a struggle to keep from launching himself at the prey lying helpless so close beside him. Julia must have known. She always knew. Her voice was steely again when she spoke. "You may go home on 2 conditions," she said. 1, you take the dose of blood. 2, Hanyu goes with you. Hanyu. He'd been in Julia's rooms a long time. Not that Antony begrudged him a chance to use the washroom, but it would have been wonderful to feel Hanyu's hands around his again. No, that was stupid. He needed his hands to talk. He especially needed them if Julia was going to force him to literally spell out embarrassingly obvious facts. "Hanyu will want to stay with Esau," Antony signed. He couldn't bring himself to argue any more about the blood, not when he knew she was right. It galled him to accept an extra ration, but as things stood, he was far too likely to lose control and attack a human the minute he was able to move again. Still, one fact remained. Hanyu would absolutely refuse to go off with Antony when Esau was so frail. His priorities were clear, and more to the point, they were correct. Hanyu and Esau hadn't done anything to cause the situation they all found themselves in. Antony had. The human's needs came first. Julia set her chin stubbornly. "Then that's too damn bad. You're right about one thing. We need to cut down on the crowding in here. Hanyu can come to visit, but I'm putting that extra cot away before we set sail and hit a storm. It's settled." Things happened quickly after that. Julia left and returned with a small cup of blood. She tilted it to Antony's lips. Then everything was a blissful haze until he came back to himself, lipping desperately at the sides of the vessel, close to tears of frustration at his inability to lick. Some gods, he thought wretchedly, were more like animals. Still, he had to admit that it helped. When Julia lowered the cup, Antony could no longer hear Esau's frantic pulse without trying. The urge to fall upon the defenseless man and tear out his throat had mercifully disappeared. Wouldn't that have just been the perfect ending to this shit show? At that point, I could have just skipped all the malingering and locked myself up with Titus and Marcus, while the others decided what to do with 3 savage beasts. Antony's dose administered, Julia sent Cloelia to retrieve Hanyu from her rooms. The young man was pale and red-eyed, and he didn't meet Antony's gaze as Julia explained the situation. I thought he wasn't angry with me, Antony thought, bewildered. But then he was sleep-deprived and out of his mind with adrenaline. Maybe now that he slept on it, he's thinking more clearly. In any case, Hanyu didn't protest Julia's plans. He stayed uncharacteristically silent as Julia and Cloelia carefully shifted Antony to the unsecured cot and carried him painstakingly back towards his own rooms. The journey was agonizing, but Antony managed to stay conscious this time. The elf blood was doing its work well. What it couldn't do was keep his crewmates from crowding around, asking questions and murmuring amongst themselves. Antony knew he should be listening to every word he could catch, trying to deduce what the rumors were about the situation and what Theo had chosen to tell everybody. He should be trying to figure out whether anyone knew that Hanyu had slipped onto the island against his orders. He should be trying to determine what the prevailing attitude towards Marcus currently was, and what people thought should be done about him. Instead, Antony closed his eyes and pretended to be unconscious even when he was perfectly lucid, and he let the whispers wash over him in an undifferentiated tide. Here we are, Julia said at last, and Antony's cot was mercifully settled. Hanyu, lay some towels on the bed. He'll pitch a fit if we get any blood or salves on his precious sheets. Yes, my lord. Alarm spiked through Antony's gut at the humble, subdued tone of his offering's voice. He stopped worrying in a rush of blinding pain when they settled him on the bed. By the time his head cleared, Julia was already rattling off instructions to Hanyu, who stood next to the bed with his hands folded demurely in front of him. I'll be back every few hours to check on him, the healer promised. I expect his tongue to grow back enough for some communication in the next day or two. In the meantime, do you know sign? Hanyu groaned, sounding utterly wretched. I'm sorry, my lord. I don't. Never mind. We can find you a wax tablet and a stylus. Do you think you can manage some writing, Antony? Antony nodded, ignoring the lancing pain in his collarbone. Writing would hurt like hell, but so did signing. It barely made a difference. I'll get it, Cloelia barked, sounding remarkably like a dog delighted to be given something to fetch. The door slammed shut a moment later. That really only leaves a few things to go over, Julia said, and Antony braced himself when he saw the uncharacteristically soft look she gave him. Do you want to talk about Titus now, or later when you're feeling better? His hands made the sign for now before she'd even finished speaking. Like this or aloud, Julia signed back. Aloud is fine. Hanyu had to hear it all sooner or later. All right. She sighed and glanced at Hanyu, then fixed her gaze back on Antony. Kalimus was right. There's nothing physically wrong with him that I can detect. Of course, I'll do my best to help. I'll make him comfortable, keep him clean and fed and everything, but Antony, this is all so far outside my area of expertise. I can heal bodies. She gave a bitter laugh. Well, I can try, as we've seen lately, but I never studied how to mend a mind, and I have no way to gauge how dangerous he might be. I know Theo has your blessing to lock him up, but I think we're going to have to come up with some kind of permanent restraint. Having him stay in my infirmary is too risky. I know. Antony couldn't force his shattered shoulder to move enough to touch his head, as a sign would usually require, but he hoped she understood his gestures nonetheless. Keeping the humans safe from him has to come first. I know. No matter how much his traitorous heart wanted to demand otherwise. All right. Julia's jaw firmed. The other issue is Marcus. I'm not going to heal him. I just want to let you know that if you order me to help him, I'm going to disobey and you'll have to punish me. I thought I should let you make an informed decision." "Of course you don't have to heal him," Antony signed, though his heart ached at the thought of his lover curled around his injuries, imprisoned and alone. "Stop that," he chastised himself. "He's not my lover anymore, and he more than earned every one of those wounds when he tried to murder the man standing right next to me. He has no right to anyone's sympathy, and I have no right to feel it anyway." "I'm not trying to be callous," Julia said, an unusual note of pleading in her voice. "I believe that prisoners deserve medical care, but I can't trust myself with him. After everything I've seen him do to you and Asao, not just this time, but over and over again, I can't." "Don't worry," Antony signed. "Maybe the healer can come from the other boat." "Do you want them to know what's happened with Marcus?" asked Julia. "Theo's been doing her best to keep it hushed up as much as possible. After all, he's your lover. We want to respect your wishes in this, Antony." Hanyu flinched at that. Antony wished he could take his attendant's hands and ask to know what was wrong, but he needed his fingers to continue this conversation. "They probably all know already. Trying to hide the situation will only make Masima feel like we don't trust or respect her, if the census didn't do that already." "I agree, if you're sure that's what you want to do," Julia said, nodding. "And Marcus is not my lover anymore," Antony signed, unsure whether the physical bite of the movements or the sense of lonely desolation that swallowed him every time he had to convey the message was worse. "I broke it off." "Really?" Julia gasped. "That's I'm sorry, I don't mean to be insensitive. I know this has to be hard for you, but, well..." She fumbled for another moment before Cloelia saved her by exploding through the door, tablet and stylus in hand. Visibly relieved, Julia relayed a few more instructions to Hanyu and then took her leave, promising to be back soon. Just like that, Antony and Hanyu were alone for what felt like the first time in months. Hanyu remained by the bed, holding the tablet and stylus and being worryingly still and quiet. Finally, he spoke. "How may I serve you, my lord?" Fuck, that was terribly stiff and chilly. Not that Antony had hoped that the man would fall weeping onto the bed with him, clutching him tightly regardless of his injuries and pressing warm kisses all over his aching head, but, well, that was exactly what he'd hoped. Forging ahead in this much less pleasant reality, Antony turned his hand over on the sheets, palm up. "Oh, of course!" Hanyu bent to press the tablet into his open hand, but Antony managed to get a weak grip on his fingers instead, and Hanyu looked down at him in wide-eyed confusion. "My lord?" The title scraped like sandpaper, but Antony didn't let go. He glanced meaningfully at Hanyu's side of the bed and gave his hand a feeble tug. On the bed, my lord?" Hanyu hesitated. "But Lord Julius said..." Antony tugged more insistently. He didn't deserve Hanyu's warmth, but he needed it. He needed to lie in his own bed surrounded by the dear, familiar heat and touch of the man he didn't deserve to love if he were going to muster the strength to begin crying for the men he shouldn't love. Some of his desperation must have shown on his face. When Hanyu pulled his hand free, he didn't leave. Instead, he moved to the other side of the bed and gingerly, cautiously began crawling up the mattress on his hands and knees. He darted a frightened glance up at Antony, who was still lying flat on his back and probably staring at him like some kind of deranged stalker. "Get a grip, Antony." Does this mean..." Hanyu faltered, stopped, then resumed whispering. "I'm grateful to accept any punishment, of course, but don't you want to send me away, my lord?" "Do I want to punish? Send?" Antony realized that his jaw was hanging slack and shut it with a snap, then shook his head as vigorously as his fractured skull would allow. "Send you away? Don't be stupid. I just found out that I would rather die than lose you. How could you think I'd want you gone?" Antony cursed his useless stump of a tongue, which kept all these words trapped in his own head. The firm headshake would have to be enough. Apparently, it wasn't. With a wail, Anu collapsed onto his face, prostrating himself right on top of all the sheets he'd just put down to protect the sheets from stains, and now, apparently, tears. "But you should!" he cried. "What the fuck?"